In the early morning at the Montrose estate, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the embroidered rose curtains, casting faint patches of golden light on the walls. The stillness of dawn was broken only by the creak of the heavy wooden door as Lady Montrose entered the dressing room. Outside, the meticulously trimmed garden gave off a faint fragrance that clung to the thin silk robes hanging by the windows. Sparrows chirped cheerfully, welcoming the new day. Eveline Montrose stood before the mirror, her slender shoulders swallowed by the pristine white wedding gown, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Her heart thumped loudly, as if ready to burst from her chest, while her trembling hands clutched tightly at a silk handkerchief. As a child, Eveline used to follow her older sister Serafina down the long mosaic corridors. Serafina, with her sweet smile and carefree spirit, always made Eveline feel safe. She had once promised never to leave Eveline alone to face the vast world. But today, Serafina had chosen to abandon her engagement to the Cavendish family to pursue her own love. And Eveline, the gentle, timid girl, was left to shoulder that duty. The thought cut through her like a knife, leaving her torn between duty and fear. Lady Montrose gently dabbed at her future daughter-in-law's tears with a handkerchief, her voice hoarse. "Eveline, I know this is a tremendous sacrifice, but our family cannot break its promise to the Cavendishes. Your husband will be Maximilian, the heir of London's most noble lineage. This is the fate your parents have chosen for you." Eveline nodded faintly, swallowing her sobs. Guilt welled up within her, but so did a flicker of pride. She, a mere secondary school literature teacher, was about to step into a world of power and wealth. The carriage rolled down the stone-paved avenue, carrying Eveline away from her birthplace. The road wound alongside the River Thames beneath rows of lavender crepe myrtles, evoking memories of the romantic poetry she once taught her students. London unfurled around her, a city of bustle and silence. On one side stood rows of red brick townhouses, on the other, the grand and austere Cavendish Manor, its blue-tiled roof reflecting the early sun. Eveline gazed through the window, trying to capture every familiar and unfamiliar detail in her mind. Cavendish Hall, just as the rumors claimed, was a magnificent edifice, like a miniature French palace. The wrought iron gates opened, adorned with intricate floral patterns. 2 rows of guards stood at attention, solemnly welcoming her. Eveline felt the heavy air of authority surround her. A team of attendants quickly ushered her through the grand hall, where a long red carpet stretched endlessly, inviting noble footsteps. She held her breath, forcing herself not to cry in this foreign place. As her hair was pinned high and the veil fell lightly over her face, Eveline felt like a fragile porcelain figurine. She was no longer herself, merely a shadow, a stand-in carrying the weight of a family treaty. Inside, she replayed her mother's strict instructions: walk straight, smile gently, answer no more than 2 questions, and keep Maximilian at a distance. But her heart was a tangled mess, screaming to say, "Please understand, I am not Serafina." Across the ceremonial hall, Maximilian Cavendish stood tall on the raised platform, imposing in his dark formal attire, his cold eyes fixed on the delicate figure before him. He did not blink, did not speak, his presence radiated authority, fitting for the heir to the Cavendish legacy. Beside him, an empty chair awaited its true occupant, Serafina, silently reminding all that this was a performance, a temporary arrangement. His voice rang out, emotionless, "Begin." The organ music swelled, mingling with the scent of eucalyptus from the flickering candles. Eveline stepped through the chapel doors, each step heavy beneath the thick layers of her gown. Her eyes scanned the rows of elegantly dressed guests. A storm raged within her, shame, anxiety, and curiosity. She wondered if the face behind her veil was as unfamiliar to them as it was to herself. With each step, she imagined the moment Max would recognize the deception, his face contorting in scorn. As she approached Maximilian, Eveline's heart pounded so loudly she could barely discern its rhythm. He looked at her, or at the mask, without a trace of emotion. His deep voice rang out, "I, Maximilian William Cavendish, take Eveline Montrose to be my lawfully wedded wife." The solemn vow, strung between names and false identities, made her falter. Tears spilled despite her effort to hold them back. Her voice broke as she responded, "I, Eveline Montrose, take." Her mind spun. She saw the outlines of her family, her mother's whisper, "Maintain our dignity, child." And yet inside, she longed to scream the truth, to make him understand that she was not Serafina. But it was too late. The ceremony ended. The guests departed, leaving the opulent hall hollow and echoing. Eveline and Maximilian entered a private lounge, the dim yellow light casting shadows over a grand family portrait. He lifted her veil, revealing his angular, expressionless face and piercing blue eyes devoid of warmth. Eveline lowered her gaze to the floor, her shoulders trembling. He asked in a flat tone, "Shall dinner be served in the main hall or the private room?" As if discussing business. She stammered, I can eat in the main hall." He nodded and turned away without another word. Eveline followed in silence, the feeling of two strangers sharing a roof sinking in. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space. In her heart, there was a quiet pride in fulfilling her duty, but also a crushing solitude. She knew the road ahead would be long, and only resolve could carry her through. The night ended in a suffocating silence. Eveline stared out the window, where the city lights shimmered under a thin curtain of rain. She made a silent vow to herself, despite the turmoil, despite the risk of exposure, she would endure, live with strength, and protect the goodness within her heart. Beside her, the cold-hearted groom, still unaware of her true identity, harbored secrets of his own. Two distant souls, bound by the invisible threads of honor and duty. The first chapter closed, opening a fragile journey between love, deception, and sacrifice. The morning after the wedding, dawn slipped through the thick silk curtains, casting a soft golden hue over the master bedroom of Cavendish Manor. Eveline awoke with a sense of displacement. The lavish bed adorned with gold-embroidered linens made her feel as though she had just emerged from a long dream. She slowly sat up, her heart pounding as memories of the first night beside a stranger rushed back. The delicate fabric on her shoulders still bore traces of the veil's pressure, and she wondered, did Maximilian remember the fear and flickering hope in her eyes as she walked down the aisle? Stepping into the corridor, Eveline was struck by the cold precision of the estate. Solemn portraits of Cavendish ancestors lined the walls, a crystal chandelier shimmered in the stillness, and intricate reliefs depicted grand conquests in gilded glory. She suddenly felt small, a pale shadow lost amid the illustrious history of the family. Her chest tightened as she recalled Lady Montrose's words, "You are the hope of our lineage." That hope weighed heavier than any treasure. In the breakfast room, the table was elegantly set with English tea, warm croissants, and slices of fine cheese. The only warmth Eveline felt was from the nameplate at her seat, Mrs. Cavendish, a title she had just inherited. Yet the seat opposite hers remained empty, as if waiting for the rightful mistress to appear. She sat quietly, not daring to glance around. Moments later, Maximilian entered in a bespoke formal suit, tall and composed. He glanced briefly at the menu, giving a slight nod, without once looking directly at Eveline. Her heart sank. She sipped the Earl Grey tea, its aroma reminding her of literature lessons on sorrow and sacrifice in classic works. Eveline wondered, was her life now destined to become a romantic tragedy? Maximilian asked a perfunctory question about the pastries, then fell silent again. Eveline forced a polite smile, trying to maintain grace, but anxiety gnawed at her. She couldn't tell whether he resented her for the deception, or whether he simply hadn't realized she was a substitute. She thought of Serafina, her radiant, confident sister, always the center of attention, and wondered if Serafina had ever experienced this aching loneliness. At the end of breakfast, a servant presented a small gift wrapped in violet silk, embossed with the Cavendish crest. Eveline took it with trembling hands. Inside was a plain leather notebook. On the first page was Maximilian's name and a note, "For my wife, with duties yet to come." The handwriting was stern but refined, and it made her throat tighten. She turned the pages and found schedules, charity project outlines, and guest lists, responsibilities that lay ahead for the heir. Eveline felt like a mere footnote in the grand atlas of power he was navigating. The rest of the day, Eveline retreated to her private chambers, staring at a candid photo from the wedding reception in the garden. She and Maximilian stood side by side, yet worlds apart. She told herself she had to adapt to her new role, hosting, greeting guests, learning how to speak with poise in front of crowds. In the afternoon, she wandered into the Cavendish library, filled with volumes on economics, politics, and diplomacy. She chose a book on royal etiquette and began reading carefully, memorizing greetings and the timing of polite smiles. The dry words might just be the key to unlocking Maximilian's heart, if he ever cared to notice. As dusk fell, Eveline stood on the second-floor balcony, watching the Thames sparkle under city lights. The wind swept through with the chill of an old city, and she felt the widening distance between herself and a husband consumed by the weight of legacy. She wondered if they would ever truly know each other, not as strangers bound by an arranged marriage, but as two souls seeking one another, willingly. In the room across the hall, Maximilian looked out the window at the same view. He held the leather notebook to his chest, his heart stirred by an unfamiliar feeling, not anger or irritation, but a quiet ache he couldn't name. He didn't understand it, only knew that his quiet wife, diligently fulfilling her role, perhaps deserved respect. In that silent moment, two lonely individuals shared the same yearning, to be understood and to reach the other's heart. Eveline smiled faintly at the sight of the family's schedule, while Maximilian closed his eyes, listening to the wind rustling outside. The silence between them held unspoken truths, and only time and trials could bridge the gap between two strangers walking toward a shared path. A winter morning in London arrived draped in fog and biting cold, mist beating against every pane of glass like tiny crystals. Eveline Montrose wrapped herself in a thin woolen shawl as she walked across the long, dark wooden corridor, gently knocking on the door of her private study. A warm golden light spilled from the desk lamp, illuminating a surface cluttered with papers and books, evidence of the many nights she had spent diligently studying etiquette and family protocol. She entered the small, classically decorated room, where an oil landscape painting hung quietly on the wall, and a piano stood unused in the corner, a silent reminder of a childhood love for music now put aside. Beyond the adjoining wall, Maximilian Cavendish had left his room early. His mornings routinely began with a strong cup of black espresso and the British Economic Journal, always placed beside the landline phone to keep him informed of market fluctuations. Eveline often heard the hurried footsteps of his assistant heading downstairs, while she quietly brewed herself a cup of honey lemon water, a comforting ritual for a heart still adjusting to a new life. As Eveline set the tea tray on the breakfast table, she looked out the window where the pale sunlight struggled to pierce the fog. The River Thames shimmered faintly like a silver ribbon across the city, tiny sailboats gliding silently across the water. The scenery was heartbreakingly beautiful, yet it did little to ease the emptiness inside her. She missed the laughter of her students, the lingering scent of chalk in the classroom, the affectionate eyes that lit up during her poetry lessons. Now, maintaining a composed face before the mirror was harder than ever when her heart ached from the silence growing between them. At noon, Maximilian's personal secretary came to deliver a message. "Mr. Cavendish has scheduled a meeting in the boardroom at 2. Eveline nodded quietly, put away the tea tray, and returned to the small parlor, intending to spend the afternoon practicing graceful greetings and poised gestures. She opened the same leather-bound notebook, filled with detailed notes on meeting agendas, charity contributions, and expansion plans for the Cavendish Foundation Scholarship Fund. Each event was listed with names, roles, and introduction scripts. Eveline read them over and over, determined not to become a burden in her husband's eyes. Around 1 in the afternoon, snow began to fall softly outside. Eveline wrapped herself in a warm coat and left the manor, walking past bare oak trees toward the Cavendish Foundation office in Mayfair. The interior was cozy, red carpet underfoot, peacock blue velvet chairs, and warm lighting. Staff members bowed respectfully as she entered, addressing her as Mrs. Cavendish with a mix of reverence and curiosity. Eveline smiled politely, masking her nervousness. This was her first time coordinating a charitable program for orphaned children. Throughout the afternoon, she absorbed detailed instructions: how to speak publicly, respond to the press, and choose an outfit that was formal yet not ostentatious. Eveline took diligent notes, a fragile hope blooming within her that if she performed this role well, perhaps she could alter the impression Maximilian held of her. She wondered if he, the man to whom she was merely a name on paper, would ever see the effort hiding behind her eyes. By sunset, Eveline returned to the manor, her wool scarf faintly scented with lavender. She hurriedly prepared for the evening's corporate gala, a high-profile event with guests from the upper echelons of society and the media, where she would stand beside Maximilian as part of a powerful couple. She carefully chose an emerald green gown that complemented her fair complexion and delicate features, styled her hair into a sleek updo, and adorned it with small diamond earrings. Before leaving, she paused before the mirror, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself with a gentle smile, "I can do this." The evening sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the soft rhythm of a piano. Guests gathered around the auction tables, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. Eveline clutched the program script tightly as she followed an assistant to the central platform, next to Maximilian. He stood beneath the lights like a figure carved from ice, his tailored black suit perfectly fitted to his tall frame, his gaze sharp and commanding as he surveyed the crowd. As Eveline approached, her heart stumbled. He glanced at her, cool, but not harsh, then turned to greet the guests. When the gentle sound of a drumroll signaled the start of the auction, Eveline spoke, "Ladies and gentlemen." Her voice echoed softly through the still room, her eyes holding more confidence than ever before. After her smooth introduction, she caught a brief glance from Maximilian as his eyes paused on her shoulder, almost as if acknowledging her presence. Adjusting her gown, Eveline allowed herself a quiet smile. For the first time, she felt the faintest trace of warmth in her husband's gaze. The event ended late into the night. Back at the manor, Eveline sank into a living room armchair, still holding the event script, which now bore a quick note from the assistant: "Mrs. Cavendish performed exceptionally." She smiled gently in the silence. Across the room, the sound of a closing door signaled Maximilian's return. Eveline remained seated, hoping for a kind word, even just a glance. But he merely stood in silence, his eyes fixed on the window overlooking the Thames, then turned away without saying a thing. Her heart skipped again. Eveline sighed and lowered her eyes to her still trembling hands as they rested on the arm of the chair. She realized that no matter how hard she tried to shine, she was still a fragile substitute in her husband's icy world. Yet deep down, she refused to give up. She believed that if she continued to understand and care for him with genuine affection, one day he would see her, not merely as Mrs. Cavendish on paper, but as Eveline, the gentle teacher with a kind and steadfast heart. The night in London fell silent, broken only by the solemn chime of the clock. Eveline closed her eyes, sending her hopes into slumber. Tomorrow, she would continue her journey to reach the heart of a man she wasn't even sure would ever turn toward her. In a nearby room, Maximilian, too, had fallen asleep, the leather notebook tucked beneath his pillow, his lips quietly murmuring a name he still barely knew, Eveline. Night had fallen over London, its ancient and modern buildings flickering under twinkling lights. The Cavendish Hall tonight was more splendid than ever. Cascades of white silk hung from the high ceilings like wisps of mist, crystal chandeliers sparkled across the space, creating an atmosphere both regal and intimate. The gentle music of the piano faded into applause as Maximilian Cavendish stepped onto the stage. His tailored black suit hugged his broad shoulders, a neatly knotted black tie accentuating his commanding presence, like a general leading an invisible battle. Eveline Montrose stood behind the curtain, her heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. Tonight, she wasn't just the wife standing by her husband's side out of duty, she was his partner in the largest charity event of the year. She recalled the long evenings spent reviewing scripts, coordinating with assistants and organizers, also that tonight every line she spoke, every gesture she made, would be effortless and elegant. Pride swelled in her chest, mingled with unease. Would Maximilian notice the effort in her eyes? Or would he remain as distant as ever? The applause subsided, replaced by Maximilian's deep, steady voice. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather to support the Cavendish Foundation Scholarship Fund, to bring words and hope to children in remote mountainous regions. Each word echoed through the hall, drawing every gaze toward him. Eveline stepped forward, smiling warmly at the guests, her voice clear and sincere. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to join Maximilian in this meaningful event. Before she could fully settle into her role, a familiar voice called out from the crowd, Eveline? Is that really you? She turned, startled, to see her former university friend, Clara Hastings, a fellow literature major, now working for an arts magazine. Clara's long hair flowed loosely over her shoulders, her sharp eyes glinting with surprise. She grabbed Eveline's arm and pulled her toward a corner. Eveline flushed and smiled awkwardly, her voice barely audible over the buzz of the room. Clara, it's been so long. Clara laughed, mischief dancing in her eyes. I heard rumors that a nobleman married someone from our class, and I couldn't believe it. But now that I see you, our kind high school teacher turned Lady Cavendish, it all makes sense. Eveline wanted to reply, to confirm with grace that she was indeed his wife, but the formal greetings she had practiced repeated in her mind. It's a pleasure to see you again. Clara's voice rose, loud enough to draw glances. Eveline Montrose, the teacher who stepped in for her sister to marry into the Cavendish family? Isn't your name printed on the guest list? That moment struck Eveline like lightning to the heart. All the room's noise seemed to collapse into a dense silence, leaving only the thudding sound of her heartbeat like a blaring alarm. She felt the warm presence beside her suddenly retreat, and a cold wind seemed to rush in. Eveline tried to lower her voice. Clara, please, don't say anything. But it was too late. Several guests nearby were already turning toward her, eyes landing on the card in her hand, Mrs. Eveline Cavendish. Maximilian stepped forward, his chiseled face stern beneath the chandelier's glow. His ice-blue eyes locked onto hers, a storm of betrayal gathering in them. Eveline felt her breath stop as he approached, his voice sharp and glacial. Explain. She wanted to cry, to tell him this had all been a desperate arrangement, a matter of survival, but her lips were numb. Not a word came out. A firm hand clutched her wrist through the thin fabric of her gown. Clara stepped back, her tone laced with a cruel satisfaction. Serafina must be delighted her substitution plan worked. Eveline averted her eyes, staring at Max with a burning desire to explain, but the words dissolved into silence. Her cheeks burned, eyes brimming with tears. He said nothing more, only turned and addressed the crowd. The evening ends here. The clinking of glasses stilled, whispers surrounded Eveline like blades. She stood alone in the lavish room, shimmering under the glare of the chandeliers, ashamed in her beautiful gown. Maximilian passed in front of her, shoulders tense, never once looking back. Eveline stood frozen, hoping someone, anyone, would reach out. But only the abrupt halt of music followed, then a silence so deep it swallowed the light. She left the hall as the moonlight wavered above the balcony, catching sight of the carriage waiting by the gate. Eveline stepped inside, her hands trembling as they gripped the seat. Outside, Clara gave a small, mocking wave, her lips curled into a bitter smile. Congratulations, she called. Your secret's out. The carriage pulled away, carrying Eveline far from Cavendish Manor, away from the frozen sea of power and exposed truth. Inside the small cabin, Eveline buried her face against the seat, tears streaming down her cheeks. Shame constricted her heart, guilt poured over her like a thunderstorm. She asked herself, would he still need her now? Would Clara's laughter haunt her forever? And more than anything, was there still room in his frozen heart for genuine love? The London night stretched endlessly, and all Eveline could wish for was a moment's pause from the pain. The next morning, fireworks echoed from Cavendish Manor like a proclamation of authority to welcome the day, but within the grand sitting room, only the sound of wind slipping through door cracks remained. Eveline Montrose tiptoed in, trying to smile as she greeted the breakfast setting. A pristine white tablecloth draped the round table, adorned with fresh fruit and buttery bread rolls. She took a deep breath to stay calm, though her heart felt knotted. The opposite door creaked open, and Maximilian Cavendish strode in, his eyes shadowed with sorrow, yet devoid of softness or hesitation. With a single curt command, "Sit," he turned away, gliding past her like a ghost in the room. Eveline kept her gaze down, not daring to meet his eyes. The lies of the previous night sliced into him like blades, and now, her image, the substitute wife, had become a stain impossible to scrub from his impenetrable heart. Once he left, Eveline broke into sobs. The dry sound of her weeping echoed in the silence, rebounding off the walls, filling her chest with shame and an unbearable loneliness. She vaguely heard hurried footsteps in the corridor. Max's assistant entered in haste, informing her of a week-long stretch of important meetings, and that Eveline was requested not to interfere or appear. She nodded faintly, tears clinging to her lashes, then quietly left the breakfast table, returned to her room, and closed the door behind her, plunging into darkness. Beyond the wall, Maximilian stood motionless at the window, eyes tracing the dreary River Thames under the fine drizzle. He closed his eyes, struggling to suppress the whirlwind within, fury at the deception, sadness at how little he knew his wife, and a painful pang stirred by her trembling figure and tear-soaked silence. And yet, he could do nothing but maintain the distance, to protect both his family's honor and his wounded heart. In the days that followed, Cavendish Hall spun into the relentless rhythm of business. Maximilian spent most hours behind closed meeting doors, surrounded by contracts and financial reports. Eveline, in contrast, was confined to a sterile diplomatic suite, only allowed to roam the halls for rehearsal speeches she would never be permitted to deliver. Every time she passed by staff members, she could feel their glances, once respectful toward Lady Cavendish, now veiled in scrutiny and thinly masked contempt, as if she were a burden on the family name. One afternoon, as Eveline opened the study door in search of a script draft, Maximilian's assistant, Miss Elizabeth, stepped in hesitantly and said, "Ma'am, Mr. Cavendish has requested that you temporarily withdraw from all family events. He'll personally revise your schedule." Eveline remained still, a sharp ache piercing her heart. All her efforts seemed to vanish without a trace. She lowered her head and murmured, "Yes, I understand." Elizabeth gave a quick nod and closed the door gently, leaving Eveline alone with her emptiness. As night fell, the single candle on her vanity flickered weakly. Eveline stared at herself in the dim mirror, the wedding gown hung limply in the wardrobe, while she, the woman who once dreamed of connection and understanding, now resembled a porcelain figure shattered into fragments. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She no longer knew whether to run away or cling to the last flicker of distant hope. Meanwhile, Maximilian wrestled with nightmares of their wedding day, the masked girl with frightened eyes silently begging him, the image of the shattered evening banquet echoing through his mind. He woke in cold sweat, confusion and guilt gnawing at him. Whatever fleeting admiration he had once felt during her poised charity introduction had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow space that reminded him of his own loneliness, one even the grand chandeliers couldn't illuminate. One late evening, Maximilian made his way to Eveline's study. He knocked, voice hoarse, "Eveline." She looked up, eyes still wet with tears. His gaze was no longer icy, but weary, laced with anger and something more painful, sorrow. She stood slowly, gripping her silk handkerchief. "What do you want?" she asked softly. He stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away, leaving behind an answer that hurt more than silence. He didn't know. Their two lonely silhouettes haunted the halls of the grand estate, the gentle woman cast into the tragedy of honor, and the powerful man tearing apart trust to guard his fractured heart. Resentment and distance crept into every breath, building toward an inevitable turning point, a life-threatening accident that would soon force them to face each other in the most unforgiving of circumstances. The London sky had remained gray for days, as if foretelling the storm that was about to come. Maximilian Cavendish sat at his desk in the vast study, shadows etched deep beneath his eyes under the dim golden lamplight. Work had piled up, reports lay unsigned, but his mind circled endlessly around Eveline's betrayal. The bitterness and pain made every step heavier, as if even the bitter strength of his usual black coffee no longer offered any reprieve. Eventually, he left the office and drove to the security equipment manufacturing facility, one of Cavendish Industries' most vital projects. Night had fallen, and the streets were quiet, wrapped in a low mist that hovered near the pavement. His black sedan glided through aging alleyways, headlights sweeping over wet sidewalks and casting pale glows against old buildings. He never imagined that a single twist of the wheel could bring him to the edge of death. At that moment, a truck suddenly swerved across his path. Tires screeched, smoke and dust billowed in the air. Startled, Maximilian turned the wheel sharply, his car veered off the road, bounced across a jagged curb. The right side slammed into a lamppost, metal screeched and flew. The shattering of glass echoed like falling hail, and the scene was painted in smoke and red. He was thrown from the steering wheel, his head slammed into the frame before his body flung out, collapsing motionless onto the street. Darkness swallowed him, leaving only the distant sound of sirens and voices shouting in alarm. When he awoke, Maximilian found himself surrounded by 4 sterile white walls and the steady hiss of a ventilator. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness slammed through him, each pulse in his head sharp as a blade behind his eyes. A nurse in a pale coat turned and gasped, "Mr. Cavendish, you've suffered a serious head injury. You've passed the critical stage, but you need complete rest. I'll call the doctor." Maximilian tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp escaped, nothing intelligible. The hospital room door creaked open. Eveline entered. The hallway light glinted off her loosened hair, her face was pale with exhaustion, eyes swollen and red. In her hands were a water bottle and a damp towel. When she saw he was awake, she exhaled deeply, the weight visibly lifting from her shoulders. She awkwardly clasped her hands together, trying to smile. "You're awake. Don't try to speak, just rest," she said softly, her voice a whisper laced with salt and sweetness from recent tears. Maximilian looked at her for only a second, his gaze blurry, tinged with faint surprise. In the first days at the hospital, Eveline remained at his bedside, tending to pain medication and listening to his every breath. She remembered all the times he had stepped away from her, but now she feared losing even 1 second of seeing him safe. Each time his pulse dropped, she sank into the chair, gently dabbing sweat from his back, her mind tightening with worry about an uncertain future. No one yet realized that the crash had been orchestrated, a calculated move by rivals in the corporate underworld. But to Maximilian, everything now was a dense fog of confusion. His memories of the charity gala, the wedding ceremony, even the sharp face of Clara, faded in and out with each moment of unconsciousness. He no longer knew who he was, until her voice came through. "You're my husband, Maximilian. I'm Eveline, your wife." She repeated those words like a prayer, trying to carve them into the fragile surface of his memory. At times, he jolted awake, eyes wide, as if trying to lift a hand to resist, only to let it fall. Eveline took that hand gently, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was so scared of losing you," she whispered. He looked at her, a flicker of trust flashing across his unfamiliar gaze. And for the first time in months, he smiled at her, an awkward, quiet smile that pierced Eveline's heart with an aching tenderness. The days passed in the hospital's hushed air. Eveline rose early each morning, packing meals for him, consulting nurses on medications. She read him her favorite poems, shared stories of her students, of the little garden behind Montrose Manor. Her voice, steady and calm, became his anchor. He listened, sometimes smiling faintly, his eyes soft even if his mind remained clouded. One afternoon, rare sunlight streamed through the hospital window, catching specks of dust as they danced in the air. Eveline sat beside his bed, speaking gently. "I remember you liked Earl Grey tea, with a slice of lemon." He smiled and nodded quickly, then shakily reached out to touch her hand. That touch, a warm connection between their palms, left both of them on the verge of tears. A longing neither had spoken of rose between them, as if in this man who had forgotten, something still remembered the love and care she offered. Meanwhile, Maximilian wandered through hazy fragments of false memory. He believed she was the only woman who had ever loved him, and though his past remained vague, the comfort he felt beside her dulled every wound. Eveline seized this moment of grace, silently promising to make up for all she had failed to give. A quiet, tender love began to bloom amidst white walls and beeping monitors, among nurses' footsteps and whispered reassurances. There she was, Eveline, staying awake by his side on the small wooden stool, watching him sleep with strands of hair falling loosely over his pillow. And in that fragile sleep, he softly murmured her name, Eveline. It was an answer, however faint, to the depth of love she had quietly poured into him. In the stillness of that night, their hands were finally clasped tightly. The cruel accident had forced their distant hearts closer than ever before. The fresh spring morning in London carried the delicate scent of wisteria along the path leading into the Cavendish garden. Soft purple petals drifted down onto the green grass like gentle whispers welcoming a new beginning. Eveline Montrose walked slowly along the stone path, carefully carrying a warm teapot toward the row of red-roofed cottages, where he was now recovering and undergoing rehabilitation. Her heart fluttered with hope and quiet yearning, as each step brought her closer to the man who now loved her wholly, even if only within the fragile walls of borrowed memory. Maximilian Cavendish sat on a sturdy oak stool, his broad shoulders resting against the open window frame. He raised his hand to catch the morning light, eyes closed as he basked in the warmth through the soft fabric of his white shirt. Though the fog of lost memories still lingered, the moments spent with Eveline, the sweet stories she told, the warmth in her laughter, had planted a vague seed of happiness in his mind. He turned to look at her, her dark brown hair cascading down, her eyes silently praying. Just one glance from him made Eveline tremble, for in those eyes was unwavering trust and a love untouched by calculation. After breakfast, they strolled together through the garden. Eveline carried a book of poetry, occasionally reciting romantic verses aloud. Maximilian walked beside her, listening in quiet concentration, nodding gently as if absorbing every syllable into his soul. The breeze carried the rustle of leaves, blending with her voice in a gentle symphony between nature and emotion. Eveline paused, touched a fallen petal, and looked at him. "Do you like this poem?" she asked. He smiled, his voice warm, "Very much. Because of you, I've come to understand what true love feels like." The following days passed like a small slice of heaven. Eveline moved into the cozy wooden guest room next to his to care for him more easily. Each afternoon, she sat at the writing desk, preparing lesson plans for her new class, while Maximilian slowly practiced simple physical therapy exercises, light weights, stretches, under the guidance of a physiotherapist. Every time he grimaced in pain, she rushed to his side, gently smoothing his hair, whispering encouragement, "Just a bit more, and we'll return to the busy world together." Her voice carried the promise of a future he never wanted to forget. At night, candles flickered gently in the grand hall, casting a warm glow. Eveline prepared simple but nourishing meals, herb-stewed chicken soup, steamed vegetables with lemon honey sauce, and brown rice cooked lovingly by hand. Maximilian sat across from her, gratitude and admiration in his eyes. He spooned the soup slowly, savoring it, then said, "You cook just like my mother used to." Eveline blushed and laughed softly. "You should call me your wife then, shouldn't you?" He nodded, smiling, "Yes, my wife." The words were simple, but they echoed through the room, sweeping away all the bitterness that had once lingered between them. Love blossomed in the quiet of daily life. One rainy afternoon, Maximilian sat by the window holding a Montrose family photo, Eveline, her sister, and their parents, taken just before the wedding. He furrowed his brows, asking gently, "Do you regret having to live in Serafina's place?" Eveline looked at him with calm eyes. "I've never regretted it. I love you with all my heart." He was silent for a moment, then suddenly pulled his hand away, surprised not by pain, but by joy. His heart was racing, not from fear but from happiness. He drew her into his arms and whispered, "You are my entire world." Within the hazy boundaries of lost memories, a peaceful world began to unfold. Eveline told him about the school where she taught, about her mischievous yet innocent students, and about the small moments that brought laughter. He listened intently, sometimes giggling like a boy. Eveline knew she had reached his heart, not through ceremony or title, but through sincerity and care. Whenever he was tired, she massaged his shoulders and placed warm towels. When he was anxious, she comforted and soothed him. Their love needed no grand vows, only the quiet gestures brimming with trust. Yet beneath this calm, Eveline lived with a quiet fear that one day his real memories would return, and she would lose everything. Each night before sleep, she silently watched him slumber and wondered whether genuine love would be enough to hold him when the truth came to light. She yearned for the future, but dreaded the moment it might arrive. The chapter closes with Maximilian waking in the middle of the night, softly murmuring her name, Eveline. Exhausted, she still opened her eyes, took his hand, and said, "I'm here." In his voice was absolute trust, and in his eyes a radiant joy, the sign of a love that had taken root deep within, despite the storms looming ahead. Only a few steps remained before the old memories would return, and with them, the greatest challenge of all, the truth they could no longer avoid. A rare morning sun slipped through the faded velvet curtains, casting a soft light over the Persian rug in the Cavendish drawing room. Eveline Montrose woke in the warm, jasmine-scented chamber. The room still held echoes of laughter and warmth from the days she had cared for her husband, but today, the air felt heavier. She sat up and glanced out the window toward the wisteria garden, the place she and Maximilian had once wandered side by side in harmony. Eveline inhaled deeply, trying to steady her nerves, but the unease within her lingered. How would the truth eventually return? A gentle knock came at the door. Eveline smiled and said, "Come in." Miriam, the family's countryside-raised maid, stepped in with a modest and respectful air, holding a carefully sealed envelope. "Ma'am, a guest has arrived and asked me to bring you this immediately." Her voice carried a hint of hesitation, and her eyes flickered with unspoken curiosity. Eveline accepted the envelope, noting the red wax seal, an emblem of Montrose Hall. Her heart tightened. She returned to the sitting room, where the antique armchair near the fireplace still retained some warmth. Eveline opened the envelope. Inside was an embossed card with the name Serafina Montrose and a brief message, "Meet me at the Montrose tea room at noon. It's urgent. S." The signature brought back memories of the day Serafina had vanished, leaving Eveline to shoulder a fate not her own. Eveline looked into the large mirror. The dress she wore was no longer her wedding gown, but in the reflection, her eyes still carried that same sorrow. She whispered to herself, "Your return is what I've feared the most." The Montrose tea room was nestled on the first floor of the family estate, where warm candlelight danced beneath stained glass windows etched with their lineage. Eveline passed a relief mural of vineyard harvests and entered a small room with a round table and high-backed chairs. At the far end stood Serafina Montrose, radiant as ever, elegantly dressed, golden curls framing her shoulders. Her smile startled Eveline. This was no longer the gentle sister she once knew, but a proud rose with thorns, sharpness flashing in her eyes. Serafina rose and embraced her. Eveline returned the hug awkwardly, her heart a storm of questions. Her sister whispered, "Are you well?" Eveline nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm fine. Just surprised to see you back." Serafina smirked. "You heard, I suppose? I broke things off with my foreign fiancé. I've come home to reclaim what's mine." Eveline swallowed hard. Serafina continued, "The Cavendish engagement was always mine. You've stolen my place for far too long." Every word felt like a blade in Eveline's chest. She stepped back, gripping the chair arm tightly. You know what I've given up for this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Serafina scoffed. "Given up? You were only a stand-in. Your role can be changed any time. I'm back now, and I want everything restored. Eveline lowered her gaze, tears brimming. But, he doesn't remember you. Serafina blinked. He doesn't remember me? I don't care about childish excuses. The engagement must be honored. Silence filled the room. Eveline stared at her sister's golden hair, caught in the candlelight, feeling both sorrow and resentment. She clenched her jaw and rose. If you want something, I won't stop you. But please, just let him have peace. Serafina arched a brow, her voice cool. He can't forget who his fiancée truly is. You were temporary. I will give him back the world he deserves. Without waiting for a reply, Serafina gave a brief nod and turned away. Eveline stood stunned in the middle of the room, her hand trembling as it pressed to her chest. She wondered, had Serafina learned the truth of his lost memories? What schemes and influence would she use to reclaim her position? Thinking of the year she had spent nursing him back to health, Eveline felt her heart collapse. The fear of being cast aside overwhelmed her. Back in her chamber, Eveline locked the door. She stood before the mirror, taking in the worn, pained reflection that stared back. She gently stroked her cheek. What do I do now? She whispered. There was no answer. She knew she couldn't stay, not as a wife in his heart, not as a stand-in in a contract, and perhaps not even as the Eveline he had come to love. The torment pushed her to a decisive end. Eveline quietly packed her belongings, a leather-bound suitcase, her wedding gown folded carefully into silk, and the worn leather planner from the past year. She picked up a small necklace, her fingers brushing over the inscription on the silver pendant, to Eveline, with love, and placed it in a hidden compartment. She kept this last memory of serenity close to her heart. Before leaving the manor, Eveline penned a letter to Maximilian. My dearest, I'm sorry for all the pain and complications I've brought into your life. I never wanted you to witness the tragedy of my family or my sister's manipulations. I once loved you with all the sincerity in my heart and hoped we could keep walking this path together. But now, I'm stepping away so you can find peace, so everything can return to what it once was. Please remember me kindly, and if, one day, you think of me, know that I've always loved you. With love, Eveline. London's noon was quiet as Eveline stepped into the waiting carriage, leaving Cavendish Hall behind. The wrought iron gate closed behind her, sealing away the fragile love story they had shared. No one knew where she was headed. Her sister smiled mysteriously in the tea room, while Maximilian, still chasing lost memories, would awaken to find her gone. A gentle schoolteacher, bearing private sorrow, walked alone through the noisy streets of London, seeking refuge in some faraway land to hide her love and her tears. The future was uncertain, but in Eveline's heart, though aching, still burned a flicker of hope for a destined reunion. The summer morning light streamed through the towering glass windows of the Cavendish office, golden rays casting themselves between the red velvet chairs. Maximilian Cavendish sat motionless on a gilded leather armchair, his eyes flashing with a strange gleam. A memory flickered through his mind like lightning across a clear sky. It had been exactly 1 year since the accident that had taken his memory, and the months spent beside Eveline, filled with quiet joys, had melted away the ice encasing his heart. As he raised a cup of Earl Grey to his lips, the taste struck him more vividly than usual, awakening a warm voice in his mind. I'll keep you warm every morning. A fleeting image surged forward, a small, delicate hand holding a tray of tea, her gentle smile as she tended to the wound on his forehead. He closed his eyes, desperately trying to hold on to that moment. But like mist, it shattered and vanished before he could grasp it. Gradually, fragments of buried memories returned like a crashing wave, their first charity gala, Eveline's cool expression as she stood beside him under crystal lights, and Clara's voice boldly naming her. He inhaled sharply, his chest tightening with the realization. The woman beside him for the past year was not Serafina Montrose, the woman to whom he had once been betrothed by family arrangement. The illusion shattered, the long-forgotten truth burst forth and dissolved the peace he'd clung to. Rage churned within him. Maximilian stood, tossing the leather-bound notebook across the desk, its spine screeching against the wood. The pages held a year's worth of memories, care routines, garden walks, whispered promises, and now felt like written betrayals. There was no longer any doubt, Eveline had deceived him and his family. His pride burned, fury pulsing through every heartbeat. His personal assistant, Elizabeth, was summoned immediately. His voice was like ice. Find Eveline Montrose. Bring her to Cavendish Hall. And locate Eveline Montrose, search all of London. Report any lead immediately. Elizabeth hesitated, startled. No contact is to be made with the Montrose family, he added curtly. I'll inform them if and when I choose to. She nodded quickly and exited in silence. In the large conference room, Eveline Montrose's image appeared on the central screen. The head of security reported, Miss Montrose returned to the country and was last seen at the old Montrose family villa in Mayfair before visiting the Montrose tea room. Her current location is unknown. Maximilian tapped the table sharply. I want her found within 3 days. Use any means necessary. The security team nodded and scrambled into action, launching surveillance, intelligence gathering, and monitoring every movement from Montrose Hall. That entire day, Maximilian immersed himself in the search. He reviewed internal reports, instructed subordinates to trace all financial transactions linked to the Montrose name, contacted private investigators, and even considered using underground networks. He steeled himself to wield every ounce of his power to uncover the truth, though a flicker of heartbreak still clung to the love he thought he had known. Weeks passed, and every report on Eveline Montrose came back empty. It was as if she had vanished from London. Maximilian received email after email from Elizabeth. No new leads, sir. No movement detected. As the days stretched on, his fury gave way to a deeper, more haunting worry. He wondered, in a world of millions, was Eveline still alive and safe? Or had she disappeared forever, carrying the pain of her farewell? In the evening, he returned to his study and stood before the Cavendish family portrait, where his father's cold gaze embodied an empire of discipline and legacy. Maximilian told himself he wouldn't let any enemy, Montrose or otherwise, steal what was left of his heart. But that heart, fractured as it was, still ached for the gentle woman who had nursed him through illness and pain. Time passed. He cancelled unnecessary meetings and focused solely on the search. Business at Cavendish Industries slowed, casting a quiet hush over the once busy empire. Employees murmured among themselves, but no one dared question the storm brewing within their CEO. Night after night, he stayed awake, the office aglow with his desk lamp as he sketched routes, pinned security camera snapshots, and followed every thread that might lead to her. Then, one day, a sliver of hope appeared. A security agent reported a rare lead, signs that Eveline Montrose had been seen in a remote mountain village in northern Scotland, involved in a school-building charity for local children. Maximilian looked up, hope blazing in his eyes. It could be where she had fled, where she hid, and where he might reclaim both love and justice. He picked up the phone and called Elizabeth. I'll go myself. As twilight fell over London, Maximilian packed his bags and left the capital. His heart raced with hope and trembled with dread. Would she be waiting for him, or had she already closed her heart forever? As his private helicopter lifted off, he gazed down at the shrinking skyline and told himself, this journey wasn't just about finding a lost wife. It was about finding himself, and the love that had been stolen from them both. And so we leave him standing at the edge of the helicopter ramp, wind tossing his hair, eyes fixed on the distant horizon, where snow-covered peaks waited for their fated reunion. In that moment, Maximilian understood, no power or prestige in the world could rival the yearning to find the woman who had made him feel alive. A new chapter was about to begin, one where love would be tested not by grandeur, but by the quiet strength of the heart. Mist clung to the peaks of the highlands, the crisp mountain breeze carrying the scent of pine through the quiet wilderness. A convoy from the Cavendish Foundation pulled up in front of a small village, its scattered stone huts nestled on a base of reddish earth speckled with gray gravel. Children in simple uniforms rushed out to greet them, eyes gleaming with excitement at the sight of brand new books and sketchpads. Eveline Montrose stood in the makeshift schoolyard, wrapped in a cream wool sweater that gently covered her growing belly, her face a mix of quiet strength and emotion. She turned to a group of volunteers, motioning for them to mark lines for a hopscotch game, then carefully placed children's books one by one onto a wooden table. The children's bright laughter echoed in the air like a warm symphony, washing away past pain. Eveline smiled quietly, her hand brushing the scarf that veiled her hidden scars. Her heart brimmed with hope. This was the life she had chosen to rebuild herself and begin again. Amid the busy footsteps and joyful commotion, Eveline suddenly froze at the distant sound of a helicopter echoing from the mountains. She looked up at the ash-gray sky and saw a black silhouette descending, finally landing at the edge of the schoolyard. As the chopper doors opened, Maximilian Cavendish stepped out, flanked by his security team. His face showed exhaustion mixed with disbelief. The last rays of afternoon sunlight caught the sharp lines of his profile, making him appear both regal and vulnerable. Eveline's heart pounded wildly as she recognized the tall, lean figure, one that had brought her both boundless joy and aching sorrow. She stood up abruptly, clutching her scarf, her eyes a whirlwind of confusion and emotion. Memories came flooding back, of their first encounter at the charity gala, the hospital nights, and the farewell letter she had left behind. She didn't know whether to rejoice or panic. Her heart still loved him, yet it despaired, believing he had forgotten her forever. Maximilian walked slowly past the makeshift stone benches, his eyes locked only on the woman in the woolen sweater, her rounded belly barely hidden beneath her scarf. Each step felt like a dream, his chest tight as he saw the fatigue carved into her face, and the gentle strength in her tear-filled eyes. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy with emotion, all his strength vanishing as he realized she was carrying his child. He stopped just a few steps away, the mountain wind catching her scarf and blowing it aside, revealing the full curve of her belly. Where Serafina's flame had once burned bitterly, now only the weight of fatherhood and the pull of love remained. Maximilian couldn't hold back. He rushed forward and grabbed her shoulders, his voice breaking. "Eveline, are you carrying my child?" Eveline froze, tears spilling as she slowly nodded. The forest fell silent. Only the wind rustling leaves and the sound of their hearts remained. Eveline placed a hand gently over her belly, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, it's our child." A tear rolled down his cheek, blending with the misty mountain air. Maximilian pulled her into his arms, clinging to every memory, every apology left unsaid. He repeated her name like a prayer. "Eveline, where have you been? I've looked for you everywhere." In his arms, Eveline lowered her head, her breath a mix of fear and fragile happiness. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to return, but I never stopped thinking of you." Maximilian leaned in, kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything I made you endure. I love you. I've always loved you." Each word was a hymn of renewal, washing away years of heartache. Everyone around them stood still in reverence, then burst into joyful applause. The children cheered, the volunteers clapped, the sound echoing through the highland valley like a triumphant anthem. Maximilian gently lifted Eveline into his arms, and the baby within her seemed to stir. She felt the softest kick, as if their child, too, was saying hello for the very first time. He whispered to her, "We'll build a home together. And our child will grow up surrounded by love." The last light of day cast a golden hue over the tin-roofed classrooms. Maximilian held Eveline's hand as they walked past the modular school buildings, each classroom a beacon of hope for underprivileged children. Eveline looked up at him, her gaze filled with trust. "You see? Love and compassion brought us here." He smiled and kissed the back of her hand. "And you, my brave wife, are the reason I'm alive." Night fell upon the mountain. A bonfire flickered in the center of the schoolyard, its warm glow dancing across their faces. Maximilian wrapped Eveline in his embrace, placing a hand over the growing life beneath her heart. The cold could no longer touch them, for within each other, they had found endless warmth. They talked until words ran out, leaving only understanding in their eyes and two hearts beating as one. The story closes in the peaceful Highland wilderness, where two souls once lost had finally found each other again, ready to nurture a new beginning. Children's laughter mingled with the music of nature, heralding a bright future for the Cavendish and Montrose families, from betrayal and tragedy to the glory of honest love. Only love, trust, and sacrifice could conjure such a miracle, one powerful enough to transcend fate itself. After days immersed in the tranquil air of the Highlands, Maximilian and Eveline decided to return to London to share their joyful news with the Cavendish and Montrose families. Aboard the helicopter carrying the young couple, Maxwell, their private doctor and longtime companion during Maximilian's recovery, sat quietly behind them, smiling as he observed the radiant joy on their faces. Eveline gently touched Maximilian's hand, placing her fingers on the faint scar left by the accident, a symbol of the trials they had endured together, and whispered, "I'm ready to face whatever comes, as long as I have you." Cavendish Hall stood proud and imposing beneath the overcast skies of late winter. The black iron gates opened wide, and 2 rows of uniformed guards greeted them solemnly. Eveline, clad in a chestnut wool coat and a hand-woven beret, looked slightly thinner but more luminous than ever. Her belly, now over 8 months pregnant, made her movements slow but confident. Maximilian led her through the grand foyer, past solemn ancestral portraits. All eyes turned to the couple as they entered. Lady Cavendish, the same woman who once coldly ordered Eveline's exile, stepped forward now with a softened gaze. She took Eveline's hand, her eyes betraying a newfound understanding. "Eveline, you've returned safely, with my future grandson," she said warmly. Eveline nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly. I only wanted to protect him and our child." Maximilian embraced his mother tightly, then turned to Eveline. "Mother, her decision was the wisest one of all." Applause erupted in the hall. Edward, Maximilian's younger brother and president of Cavendish Industries, stepped forward with a wide grin. "Brother, I thought you'd abandoned the company to elope with the Highlands." Laughter echoed through the room. Eveline grasped Maximilian's hand, feeling the warmth of a second family she had once thought lost to her forever. Later that afternoon, in the stately study, Serafina Montrose was brought in. Dressed in an emerald evening gown, Eveline's elder sister retained her proud composure, though her eyes appeared dimmer than before. Maximilian rose, his voice steady. "Serafina, the Montrose family treated your sister like a commodity to be exchanged. But she is my wife, and soon, the mother of my son." Serafina froze, a flicker of regret passing through her gaze. Eveline stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You drained my heart, but still, I forgive you." Serafina burst into sobs, falling to her knees before her sister. "Please, forgive me." The moment was raw and moving. Maximilian helped Serafina to her feet and said quietly, "We are family. Look at your soon-to-be nephew." Serafina glanced at Eveline's rounded belly, her voice breaking. "He always loved you, and that child in your womb." 1 week later, a grand event was held at the Royal Library to announce the newest member of the Cavendish Foundation. Eveline appeared in a flowing pale blue maternity gown, her hair braided gracefully over one shoulder, her beauty serene and dignified. Beside her stood Maximilian, composed yet commanding. As she stepped onto the stage, hundreds of guests applauded in welcome. Eveline beamed. "Thank you for your support of the Letters and Love program. Today, I do not only speak for the Cavendish Foundation, but for love and for hope." All eyes fell reverently on her warm, expectant belly. As the applause subsided, Maximilian stepped forward and embraced his wife on stage, pressing a kiss to her forehead before the admiring crowd. The following month, the Cavendish Montrose heir was born amid overwhelming joy. The newborn's first cry rang strong and pure beneath the soft golden glow of the delivery room. Eveline held her son close, tears of happiness streaming down her face, while Maximilian gently stroked the baby's downy hair and whispered, "Welcome, little one. You are our pride and joy." In the days that followed, the Cavendish estate echoed with the sound of children's laughter. Eveline introduced her son to Mozart and Shakespeare, while Maximilian recounted tales of Cavendish glory by the crackling hearth. Together, they baked their child's first birthday cake, completing a dream of family once thought impossible. All the trials, from arranged marriages and betrayal, to fury, loss, and reunion, had led them to this place of genuine love. The road ahead, the journey of parenthood, would be far from easy. But hand in hand, with love forged through pain and loyalty, Eveline and Maximilian knew they were strong enough to weather any storm. They named their son Oliver James Cavendish Montrose, placing both family names as a symbol of unity and a new future. Beneath the twinkling London sunset, the powerful father, the gentle mother, and their shining child stood together under the blue sky, writing a new hymn of happiness, forever etched into the legacy of two great families.